for a second. Okay, yes, we are officially recording. Okay, so Dark Bleatings, everyone. Very, very happy to be here with Lee Murray today, who is an award-winning author of what I like to call genre-blended horror. Recently, I have read Dispatches, which is this is a word I can never say, an epistolary. Is that
Yeah,
right?
I can't say it either.
Novella.
Epistolary, I think it might be. I don't know.
I know how to read it. One of those books that's made up of, articles and news clippings and different narrative styles. And also, I'm always mess the title up when I talk about this to people. Fox Spirit on a Distant Cloud, which comes across, it feels like it could read as either one piece with a central narrator or a short story collection with a central narrator. I feel like it works as both. So yes, welcome to Happy Goat Horror, Lee. Thank you very much for joining us all the way from, is it New Zealand?
Yes, it's New Zealand. Thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure. I've always enjoyed your reviews and commentaries, so it's so lovely to be here. So thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, you are here by popular demand. I put a shout out asking people who they would like to see a conversation with, and a lot of people contacted me demanding you. So it was for my own good and for the good of the channel as well. So the first thing I wanted to ask you about with Fox Spirit on a Distant Cloud. So it's very poetic, and it's really horrific in some moments. So it'll shock you with the. For those who aren't familiar with Lee's writing, I think that you are a very beautiful writer. Your sentence construction and the way that you use language is so poetic and beautiful, but the things that you write so it's a bit disarming, because you're like, well, I thought this was horror, and then you carry on, you're like, oh, I see. And you feel your soul fly out of your body, and then a minute later it renders you tearful. So I go through a lot of emotions when I'm reading your work, Lee.
Oh, that's such a lovely thing to say, because I mean, isn't that the point of literature, is to make us feel something and to provoke,
Yes.
Thought and emotion. I mean, that makes me feel like I've succeeded in some sense. So thank you for saying that. It's lovely to hear.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, and sorry to everyone, because I'm very likely to just gush at random moments about how much I like your work. I try to keep it to a minimum when I'm doing an interview, but it's really hard. Can you talk a little bit about the fox spirit in that book, because that concept is new to me. I never heard of it before. I'm assuming it's it's from mythology, isn't it? So yeah, if you could talk a little bit about that, I'd love to know a bit more.
Okay, so yes, this is the book cover for Fox Spirit on a Distant Cloud. Isn't it gorgeous? Yeah, lovely. I'm so delighted about it. It's has a very New Zealand feel as well as very Asian feel. So really excited about that. And the title, which you said is hard to remember, is Fox Spirit, which is the mythology, and a distant cloud, because New Zealand is, the Maori name for New Zealand is Aotearoa, which means land of the long white cloud. So it conjures this notion of this little disembodied fox spirit, piece of Chinese mythology, off on a diaspora type journey to a different place. And so that's the reason for that very convoluted title, which means something here and perhaps doesn't mean something elsewhere. But yes, the fox spirit is a really interesting creature of Asian mythology. It's often a woman, sometimes a man, but mostly a woman, and it has all those kind of tropes that are associated with women, malevolent and scheming and sort of powerful and seductive, and all of those kinds of ramifications. But it's a shape-shifting creature, which must go through a really long lifetime. I think it's 500 years in some stories, but basically 9 lives of different people trying on these lives, and each time it gets a new tail, because the 9-tailed fox spirit, and it must go through these lives in order to ascend to the celestial heavens. And so for me, that was just a really great metaphor to inhabit the lives of Chinese women in New Zealand and to sort of tell those untold stories. So I was particularly looking for stories that were not necessarily those positive, happy stories, which with Chinese women, particularly, we're not allowed to talk about things that are unpleasant. We're supposed to be submissive and quiet and not speak out about oppression and abuse and those sorts of things. We're supposed to be happy with our lives and sacrifice ourselves for the good of the community and the family. And so I wanted to tease out where those things, where those tensions were. So I looked through Papers Past, which is an archival system in New Zealand, looks at magazines and newspaper articles, and looked for those stories that were kind of hidden and quite horrific, some of them, as you've said. And so, yes, in some ways, it's a very strange beast, isn't it? So I think it's prose poetry. My publisher calls it a novel in verse. They say is it horror? Well, yes, it's horror, but it's also literary fiction, and it's also short story, and it's also biography and memoir, and it's historical fiction, and it's all of these things and none. It's a confusing thing, and I think you're right. I write at that sort of intersection of culture and myth and history, and the places that scare me, that sense of otherness. And so it's very hard to define, isn't it, as a piece of work, but I'm very proud of it. It was extremely difficult to write. I did speak with lots of people as well to get their perspectives, because market gardening, for example, and fruit shops and laundries, they're kind of where a lot of Asian people have found their place in Western societies. So I talked with lots of people whose families had those experiences as well, to kind of glean. So while some of these stories are distinctly, inspired by specific stories that I found in newspapers and what have you, they're also influenced by these other discussions, these sort of more primary discussions with other people who've had these experiences. So it's been a very uplifting and very difficult thing to write, because it's so personal, even though they're not my stories, if you know what I mean. It's just really, I'm very excited about it, and I think it's won a prize for unique and original vision. So once again, it's one of those difficult beasts to classify. So really proud of it, and I'm glad it resonated for you.
It's definitely unique. I've never read anything like it, both in structure and story as well. I was thinking about the headspace that you must have had to get into to write this story, because so it alternates between women's stories, so like female characters, and then it goes cuts to and from the fox, like picking up these like new skulls or new bodies to inhabit, or and it gets very, very dark in some, some of them. And I was thinking, if I write something that's sort of based in the real world and it's really dark, I feel a bit glum afterwards, and I have to, go and watch something funny. So I was thinking about where you must have been emotionally as you were writing these things. And I thought it resonated a lot, just like from a female perspective. So I can't speak to an Asian perspective. Obviously, I am a very boring person in the Welsh valleys. Apparently, I'm as white as a ghost. That's where I get told all the I'm the whitest white person. So I don't have sort of like, well, no, the Welsh we do have mythology, but it's not really the same. But I felt like I was reading a book about sort of female rage sometimes, and the things you're afraid you might do. Like if you could just
Yes.
get pushed so far, like the worst things you could imagine yourself doing. So it's really a book of horrors, like internal horror.
Yeah, it
I
really is.
feel.
It is. And you know, um, the woman who chopped her child up with a cleaver, that actually happened. So, you know, that is reality. Is like, what would
Yeah.
push a woman to do that? Um, just what would push her to do that? Why would any woman do that? And then when you look at those kind of historical constraints around women and the lives that they lived, Chinese women, you could see that. But I think that those notions are uh, what's the word, universal, because what would we do in that circumstance? You and I, does any woman, any person, push to the limit, what might we do? And I think those are the things that we're looking at. And the silence, the complicity, the silence around that was quite horrific. And I think there's a lot to be said about real life is actually stranger than fiction, is it not? And I think that it was harrowing to write. I had to put those skulls on my head in the same way as the fox spirit does, and just trying to find your true self in that. So even as a writer, you're trying to write as honestly as and authentically as you can. And so it really meant digging deep into my sort of own emotional core in order to find those words. And to do it in a beautiful way. I really wanted it to be done in a beautiful way because these women have made huge sacrifices in order to assimilate and to become, part of, have their families and their children become part of New Zealand culture. So yeah, it was, and I think that those experiences happen in lots of places. I have some Welsh background as well, and my dad's family came out to New Zealand, and so there are those stories throughout the world. Humans relocate over history all the time, and so there are the sense of not belonging and how to fit in, and how to live our lives in a different space, in a different landscape, in a different culture. Those are real fears. Those are very real fears, even today.
Yeah, there was a real sense of I once I've connected to a character, I very much feel like I am them for the duration of the story, which is, sometimes great and sometimes really harrowing. And I always identify with characters that feel very othered. I was a strange child, and I found it very hard to make friends. And so a lot of my early life, and I'm still like this as an adult, if I walk into a room full of people, even if they're my friends, I feel very like uncomfortable for a minute, and like I don't belong there. So there was a particular story, the one with the woman whose husband is planning to take the baby and just leave without her, and she was just so isolated and confined to her home. And I just, oh, my heart, when I was reading that, I just thought, oh gosh. And I thought I can kind of understand anything she might do at this point, even though it's like,
Yeah. And I think we've just come out of a pandemic where people were isolated in their homes. So perhaps that resonated a little more because, we understand that living in a room, like you can't go out, there's nowhere for you. So that's something that people have very real experience of now, isn't it? So yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
feeling sort of boxed in and isolated and without options. Yes, it's a very universal feeling all of a sudden, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think this is the place of horror, isn't it? It's that
Mhm.
weirdness, we all do feel these things. And, horror is a wonderful place to explore those aspects. And, and although this particular book isn't really being marketed as horror, I
Mhm.
think to allow access from people who go, oh, no, I don't read horror, not horror, but it is
Mhm.
horror. And I think that is really a place for hope and understanding and solace, because we are a little bit strange. All of us feel strange at times, and so that's something that is universal, and we're all able to tap into, I think. So I think horror is a great space for that.
Yes, I agree. I find the world can be very dark and scary, and if you've read a really horrific horror novel or something, when you emerge from it, it doesn't feel that bad in real life.
Exactly. You kind of hanging those demons out to dry, aren't you? You put them on the page and they're sort of contained, and you can look at the different aspects, the perspectives, and how could we do it differently, and what would make a difference. And I think that that's quite hopeful in many ways.
Yeah, I find that I've noticed this with every author that I've spoken to and interviewed so far, and people I've spoken to at conventions, is that the people who write the darkest, most severe um, types of horror are always the most sunshiny, friendly people in real life. I feel like you purge a lot of stuff out, and then there's just,
Well, yeah, there's a lot to be said for that. I'm co-chair of the Horror Writers Association Mental Health Initiative, I'm hearing this from lots of our contributors and people who've been involved in the project, that yes, writing allows them to kind of purge those demons and reassess things on the page and give them some distance, if you like, or allows them to kind of some safety around that topic. So and some people have said, look, it saved my life, writing saved my life. It might be a bit of dark poetry, because they can just pour it out on the page, and it's expunged, if you like, and so, those things never go away, but they're at
Yeah.
least put aside for the moment. And I think that there's a lot to be said for that, and for everybody, young people particularly. I think, I remember being young and writing little poems to myself, and they were full of teenage angst, but they were valuable in the sense that they allowed me to express those things. So, yeah, I think there's lots of space for finding solace in not just reading horror, but also writing it. Yeah.
Yeah, you do work with very heavy themes in your novella Dispatches. Um, oh, what a great read, by the way, everyone who's watching this. that that really that was a mix as well of lots of different things. So you had sort of historical horror fiction with sort of cosmic horror in there, and yeah, like the storytelling format. I love stories that are told through different formats, like articles and newspaper clippings and like little narrative pieces of prose and things. Do you start with sort of theme or concept when you're approaching a story, or do you get a character first, or do you have a typical sort of process?
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, in the old days, I guess I would just, start with a character or an idea, a concept. But nowadays, I don't get to write so many of those kind of speculative. Well, when I say speculative, they're often speculative, but I'm in genre, but just an on-spec story to send out somewhere. I don't have a lot of time for that. So I generally get, an editor or a publisher approaching me and saying, hey, Lee, would you write a story for this magazine or this anthology? Here's our theme. Could you give us something? And then I'll say, oh, would you like something kind of New Zealandy, or, and then they say, oh, yes, please. And so then I come up with a concept based on the theme that the editor has given me, and trying to do something that no one else is doing, because there'll be 20 other incredible writers, and I'll have to try and find my little niche and something different that they're not doing but still fit that theme. So so where the start point is really depends on which story I'm writing and for whom, and the purpose of the story. For this particular one, for Dispatches, which are, it's I'm so proud. Look at that gorgeous cover by Australian author Greg Chapman. It's just so lovely. I'm so excited about it. So that for that particular story, I was having a chat with Angela Yuriko Smith, who's a double Bram Stoker Award-winning
Yeah.
writer and editor.
So
Yes, absolutely.
yeah.
And also Maxwell Ian Gold, who is an up-and-coming queer writer of cosmic poetry. And he was looking to move into some short story. And we were talking about the war. It was around about the time the Ukrainian war, broke out, and obviously we're all very, very concerned about that and very stressed. It was triggering Maxwell for the sort of Jewish aspect, and just bringing up all sorts of generational trauma for him, and also for Angela, because she's a third generation Shimanchu author, so from the Okinawan Islands, which it falls between Japan and the USA, and of course that culture has almost been obliterated. It's their home is gone, and so she was feeling very much the same way, and so we sort of said, oh, let's do some work around this. So the three of us started writing novellas. I believe that Maxwell has had his picked up. It's called I Am Someday, I think, which is a sort of it's a story set on the human trains to Auschwitz and Birkenau, and very horrific type of cosmic ghost story, if you like. And Angela Yuriko Smith has written In Eugenie, which is a story about the Okinawan Islands and a young woman trying to escape, and she can't because she's held there by some supernatural forces, but also she doesn't hold back. It's all horror. So that was, and my own contribution was Dispatches, and I kind of brought that sort of New Zealand theme because, of course, Anzac Cove and the Dardanelles Peninsula and the goings on there in World War I were very pertinent to New Zealanders. And yesterday was Anzac Day in New Zealand. So, it's still a lot of hurt and a lot of, memories around that very brutal time. I mean, the number of people that, they say it was, what was it, 90,000 people died on that peninsula. It's just an unfathomable number. And so I went and did a lot of research, and I love that epistolary, I don't know if I said it right either, approach, because it's you're like the detective as a reader, aren't you? You go and you see, oh, here's this little letter, and then over here there's a newspaper article, and then here is something, and you piece it all together, and it's like you're reading someone's diary, or and you're getting the story laid out in front of you, and you can see things that perhaps the protagonist of the story, the main character, doesn't see at all. I mean, you're seeing, oh, this is happening and he doesn't know this. And, it's a very immersive approach to writing, and it can be quite harrowing, can't it? It's those first-hand primary sources that are giving you the story, and I did love it. I don't know why I chose it. I think it was because it was that historical approach and having that letter writing style, because that's how we do know a lot about what went on at Anzac Cove, because many of those people did not survive, and the ones that did were so traumatized they didn't want to talk about it. So this particular story I dedicated to an adopted grandfather of mine. He had no family of his own, and my parents lived next door to him when I was born, and he became my adopted grandparent because I lived distant from my own both my grandfathers had died, so he became my grandfather, and he was at Gallipoli. He was someone who looked after the horses, and so he was, and the things he saw, and the things he saw, just incredibly sad. And he went to the Battle of Somme, and my mother believes he fell in love with one of the nurses, and so of course he lost contact with her, and just a really sad story. So of course you can see that I've imbued some of that in Dispatches. So it's kind of horror, and it was also hopeful, I hope, and a little bit diverse. It talks about, my main character is gay, and of course in that period he's very othered, and he can't tell his real truth. So in some ways both these stories are about speaking your real truth and being your authentic self. So the fox spirit, she wants to be, to go to heaven and be herself and be a true individual with understanding, yeah, and the same with my character Cassius Smythe from Dispatches. He wants to be his true self and tell his truth, and he can't, in the same way as the fox spirit. So it is it's a key theme of mine. At least it has been in the last couple of years, and you know, different ways to explore it. We're lucky with horror because, you know, we can try all these different sorts of forms through poetry and other forms of storytelling. So I'm very pleased about the way they came out and also the lovely response to them.
Yes, I've seen my friend Dave Jeffrey talks about your work a lot. I don't know if you know Dave, but he's a big fan of yours, and I think he's involved with the mental health side of the
Yes,
yeah, the
yes.
Horror Writers Association. Yeah. So yeah, he's that's how I found your work, is through Dave talking
Ah.
on Facebook, and I was like, oh, and I always have a mile long to be read list. I think I don't add anything else to it, and I was like, oh, go on. Just one. I'll just and then, you know, then of course I go down a rabbit hole if I find a writer who's writing, you know, connects with me as yours does, and now I'm gonna have to go through your whole back catalogue.
Oh, that's very kind. Look, Dave is, I work with Dave on the HWA Mental Health Initiative. He's a fantastic writer in his own right. I think he's probably a bigger fan than my mother. So you know, I'm very grateful for his support. He's been a wonderful support to me, and very inspiring. I mean, he's got such a great background in mental health advocacy, which has been so important to the work that we've been doing about improving, you know, portrayals of mental illness in horror and trying to eliminate stigma, which is a real issue and has been, particularly in the film industry, but also, you know, because it's more difficult to show internal thought in film and that kind of thing. So yeah, and it's been, I've really enjoyed working with him. So yes, thank you for mentioning that, because he has been a great support. And horror is like that, isn't it? You know, it's such a lovely, welcoming community, and people do signal boost and shout out, and I think that's just a wonderful part of horror.
I think, yes, he's one of the most supportive people of other people's work, and yes, he's an all-round good egg, Dave.
He sure is. He sure, and his Quiet Apocalypse series, amazing. It's just amazing.
Those books, I could not put them down.
Yeah, and looking in Cathedral, which is the last book in the series, he did that epistolary type approach with a sort of tribunal. You know, that that very immersive, you know, and taking us back through the series. That was inspired. I really enjoyed that one. That was, you know, really great, and bringing back those characters so that we could see what went down, and yeah, it's such an exciting approach. I think Eric LaRocca has done it. You know, things have gotten worse since we last spoke, and so recently he did that with his horror work, and so I think there is a lot of movement in that direction again, because it's such a great form, particularly, and there are modern versions of it, because, you know, social media is effectively that. You know, you see snippets of things, and then, you know, and you put together your opinion based on, oh, I saw this over here and this here, and you sometimes don't look critically at where those things are coming from. So even in our modern day, we have this kind of thing happening in our everyday, you know, where we're reading a variety of things and forming an opinion. So so I think there's a lot more scope for seeing more horror in that sense coming through. So yeah, exciting.
Yes, I think it's I receive a lot of review requests through the website. So I read all types of horror every week. I try to read a couple. I will never ever catch up with the request list, but
there's no way.
But yes, there's an awful lot of new kind of ideas emerging, and old ideas coming back around. I've seen a lot of I really appreciated seeing cosmic horror sort of circling back around. The mental health stories I just wanted to touch on from what you said is there is a danger about stereotyping in any horror story that uses mental health as a storytelling device. And normally, if I realize that that's what I'm reading, my brain just goes, "Oh no, this is," because I do unfortunately read a lot of books where mental illness was the villain all along, but it's just made the person a one-dimensional villain.
Yeah.
If I read one more story that it turns out someone's being terrorized by some unseen force and it turns out to be them the whole time, and they've got
Yeah.
the ID or something, and I think, oh no, and I hardly ever read stories that um explore mental health in an authentic way. I feel sometimes like I can tell if the writer has really gone through something or they're just drawing from horror films. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah. I think it's a little bit lazy, isn't it? And and I think there is so much to mine. I mean, 1 in 8 people, suffer. I think that's the number from a mental illness at
Yeah.
some point in their lives. And we are nuanced. I mean, I suffer from anxiety and clinical depression, and and we're not just the sum of our psychosis or our mental illness. We are so much more than that. And I think that and so if we're doing a deep dive into character, which is what story is
Mm.
about, then we should be looking at those nuances, those other aspects, and just making and I think the truth is that someone with a mental illness is way more likely to hurt themselves than they are to hurt someone else. And so that
Mhm.
making them into the monster who goes rampaging around and as a serial killer is really a little lazy. And I think there are
Yeah.
other things that we can be doing with story and couching things in metaphor and imagery, using structure, using internal thought. There are so many ways that we can do better, and also drawing on lived experience and
Mhm.
research, and all of these kinds of conversations that we can be having in order to create much richer, layered
Mhm.
horror. And of course, that those are more engaging stories, those are more uplifting stories, those are the stories that resonate for us. So why wouldn't we want to write those more elevated stories? So I think, and that doesn't mean taking away anything from the horror at
Yeah.
all, those cultural aspects of mental health, which are quite
Mhm.
different, so I think there is so much scope for doing beautiful work around that, and there are some fantastic work. So I've been involved in a number of panels actually just recently where I've heard some wonderful examples of that. The classics, obviously Poe, and Gilman, Charlotte
Yeah.
Gilman, the yellow wallpaper. Those are fantastic stories, which are stories in the heads of those characters. Telltale Heart, for example. And
Mhm.
you really understand the psychosis of those, the of those characters and how real it is. How that could be us. Um, and But then more recently, some works that Dave and I have been reading, Whalefall by Daniel Kraus, which is almost a suicide ideation, but not. Like that how do you survive grief and trauma? That's a wonderful one, inside the body of a whale. Like how do you? It's such an interesting metaphor. And a like story is Lauren Elise Daniels' Serpent's Wake, A Tale for the Bitten. Beautiful, beautiful, different, entirely different, but also, inside a serpent, how do you
Mhm.
discover, how do you cope with this, long-term trauma? Beautifully beautiful, very poetic. I wish I'd written it. And so, but there is just so many beautiful ways, and also horrific ways to write these stories. And so, yes, I'm hoping that horror in general, we can be the place, because horror is subversive and it's transgressive
Mhm.
and it's progressive, and it's diverse. So I feel that we have this huge opportunity in this particular genre to address these things in a much more positive, sensitive, and also, eye-opening way. Like we can really be at the forefront of this aspect, this subgenre of work, and not the stereotypical lazy writing that we've seen in the past. And there's no point in saying, oh, this one is bad and this one. We just need to move forward and say, let's see what's good. What can we do now that's better? We because we move on, right? There are some stories that have been written a long time ago, and we look at them and go, oh no, that's really outdated. We've moved on from that. And I think the same in this area of mental illness in horror. We've just got this exciting environment. And again, we're coming out of a pandemic where everyone was isolated and a lot of people suffered a lot from mental illness as a result, anxiety and stress and trauma. A lot of people lost grief, lost loved ones, so grief and trauma, and it's still ongoing. So I think again, it's a time where we're open to these dialogues, and wow, we're as horror writers, we are just poised in the place to be doing great work here.
Yeah, I think if there's one thing that I will always insist that this is true, that horror in particular as a genre is a really open place for empathy, and like sharing other people's experiences, people that don't live your own lived experience, and so you can learn about just what other types of people go through. I recently read a short story by a writer called Marka Pennington, and it was about it was a horror story about a trans lady going to a very dodgy surgeon. She just does not feel like female enough, and I'm not a trans person, but I was like it really like got me the isolation and just like that feeling of she didn't properly feel like a woman. And I thought, well, I'm not trans, but I felt very I don't really measure up to these other like that kind of there's a lot of relatable things in there. I've found I've connected to a lot of writers that are from different places to me, and all sorts of things through like those common things that we all share. And
yeah,
I find it very eye-opening sort of genre. It's a great place for difficult conversations as well. My husband commented he hasn't met many of my writer friends because he isn't in like the horror circuit. He's not a horror fan, but he did mention that the couple of people he's met, he said that the men he's met are men that he knows I'm safe around if I go to conventions, and like the company that I keep at horror conventions and things. I always go off to those by myself. And he said he knows that he doesn't have to worry about my well-being because my friends will like look after me. And he said that not that all men who don't watch horror are like dangerous predators or anything, but he said that he thinks that there might be something in men who write might have a bit more empathy for women because they've got into the heads of women when they're writing, and maybe they understand like dynamics a bit differently and behavior a little bit differently. Does that make sense? Am I just rambling?
Potentially. No, potentially. I mean, I think there is something in that we must inhabit those characters while we're writing. So there is that, yes. And if you've got women characters are traditionally abused in fiction, are they not? I mean, I know there's been a criticism of that in crime. If you've got a serial killer, he's off stalking women. It's just tradition, because they're an easy target. And so yes, I do think that potentially that is a possibility. That is a possibility that we can create empathy by inhabiting the lives of these characters and understanding how they tick. And Well, I would hope so, and you would hope that that would also occur for readers. You know, they
Yeah.
live someone else's life and someone else's experience through literature, and they come away with some understanding and some empathy, as you say. I think that is
Mhm.
that is a truth of all literature, that if you read, you will have greater empathy. I think there's been
Yeah.
some research. I vaguely remember reading that somewhere. Um, the issue is that I think that this world is just so that there are so many distractions. Is that
Mhm.
perhaps younger people are reading less? I don't know, or they're reading in different ways in different formats. And so, and I think that shorter pieces like Dispatches, which is a novella rather than a novel, are perhaps a little more accessible, and also those little vignettes. So this
Yeah.
form of writing, and both of these books actually, the short form, a quick fire. You can dip in and read this and feel something, and step away. So I think that is perhaps more of a that we'll be seeing more of that going forward, because
Mhm.
people have so many distractions, so much to consume and to sift every day in terms of story. And I mean, we live our lives through story, through the news, and through
Mhm.
what the kids, the family have been doing. How are you, what have you been doing, social media. It's just
Yeah.
a deluge of story, and we have to pick and choose. And so, I think that is that. How do we get that empathy? How do we still connect with readers in a way that is
Mhm.
meaningful and that they can do? And I personally, I love the novel. I haven't had time to write a novel for a few years, and so I'm really looking forward to getting back into that. But I think these shorter works are great for building a connection with readers, and also just getting those important issues out there.
Mhm. What do you think of the idea? I've heard it said many a time that novellas and short story collections just don't sell, apparently. And I'm sure there must be some truth for publishing numbers that's based on somewhere. But I personally love a novella and a short story collection, especially if I don't have a lot of time to read, but I would like to read a whole story.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Oh, I think they're like chocolate boxes, like, oh, what will I
Yeah.
have next? Like it's just, oh, well, I'll read that. And then I discover a writer, and then I can go and read more and read their novel or whatever they're doing, or their poetry collector. Oh, this person writes short story. And, they've done a poetry collection or an essay collection, or perhaps they've written a film. Like, it's just
Mhm.
exciting to discover these new voices, new perspectives. So I absolutely love an anthology, or
Yeah.
and I am an anthologist. I think I've done 24 or 25 now.
Yeah.
And I absolutely love discovering new writers, and also I think for a reader, they're a great sampler.
Mhm.
You're investing in a book, and that might have 20 writers, and it might have two that you've
Mhm.
really enjoyed. And for not a lot of money, you get this great sampler of
Yeah.
writing and stories that you can sample at any time. Like morning tea time, I'll just read a
Mhm.
story, and I love that. I think that is the beauty of them. um, but also, different perspectives on a theme. Like if you're reading
Mhm.
a novel, that's great, you're getting that in-depth story. But if you're reading a short story collection and they're all on I don't know, things under the bed, or childhood
Mhm.
fears, or then you can really, if you've got a child who's dealing with night terrors or something, that is something that you might want to dip in to see what those perspectives are. So that's it's I think they're very exciting, and I don't understand why some. I think that's all about marketing, to be honest, because I do
Mhm.
think that there is a demand for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, but maybe that's just me because I want to read them.
No, that's me too. I love an anthology, and a box of chocolates is a great way to describe that, because I've discovered writers that I'd never heard of before through anthologies, which is a blessing and a curse, because as I said, never ending to be read
Yeah.
pile, and then I just
Oh,
end up on
I'd have,
Amazon adding books.
yeah, we're going to have to live till we're 400 or 500 to get through them all, and by then I will have bought a lot more. So yeah, and I think they're two different hobbies, right? Reading and collecting books.
Oh yeah, completely different hobbies. I've got bookshelves of all the books I've read, and then I got a separate bookcase for things I have not yet read, but they're in sections. And then I've got my request list through Happy Goat. So I just can't stop buying them though, Lee. I keep putting myself on book buying bans, and then I don't know why I bother to say I'm not going.
Yeah, me too.
If I can get a good
I'm going to
ebook.
need a bigger house, I think.
Yeah, that's what we need. We'll just move. It's fine.
Exactly. What's the problem? I don't see the issue.
I'm terrible for I read ebooks for the review requests mostly, but then if it's a book that I really like, I'll then buy a physical copy anyway to have on my shelves. So just so I can look at it, I guess.
Yes, I love having the signature from the author too. That makes it so special when you've got a signed copy. So a lot of my shelves is like I've had to sort of say, oh, look, I'll buy the ebook, but actually, if I'm going to buy the print book, then I need the signature. I want the author's, collectible. So that's been really nice. It's lovely to have your friends on your bookshelf. There's something really special about that, and I'm very proud to have such lovely friends and lovely writer friends. And it is nice to see their work displayed in your home,
Yeah, I do. There's nothing better than when you're friends with someone who's lovely and they're also a very talented writer, and then it's a pleasure to buy their stuff and support their work because you really enjoy it, and then you get your book signed. And those book conventions are kind of a workout for me because I end up taking so many books with me for people to sign, and then I buy more that I have to. So.
But it's like visiting your friends, that they're in your home and you can take them off the shelf and visit with them. It's really rather lovely. But yeah, I totally agree. When I go to conferences overseas, my husband often comes with me, and the last couple of times I've been to the HWA StokerCon, he just goes out while I'm at the conference and buys a new suitcase, because he knows I'm going to need an extra suitcase to take the books home. I mean, he's a keeper. I'm just saying.
Yes.
But I came back to the room and there was this new suitcase, and I went, "What's this?" And he said, "Well, I figured you'd need it for the books that you'll buy."
There's nothing better than a lovely supportive partner.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
My husband does not share in this interest with me, but he's very supportive in that last year I said, we got married last year, so we were saving, and I said, I don't think that I can really justify the money it will take to go to FantasyCon this year. And he was like, you have to go, Kaylee. It's a book event and you're an aspiring writer and you review books. He's like, you can't not go. And I was like, oh, okay then. I was
that's
feeling
in
guilty about
Chester
it.
this year, isn't it? I'd love to be there. So I've bought a registration. I've got my fingers crossed. I'm not quite sure if I'll make it this year. It's such a long way from New Zealand, but yes, and it's got Priya Sharma as guest of honor this year. So I really I want to meet her. We've had some conversations online and what have you, and I've read her work. Obviously, she's such an exciting writer. Again, in that novella space. So she's doing some really great things, and I'm looking forward to meeting her one day. So yeah.
I just interviewed her. She was the last person that I spoke to before you, and she I can't remember if it was during the recorded conversation or we chatted for a bit after, but she also mentioned your work. So.
Oh really? Oh, that's so kind of her. Yeah. Oh look, yeah, she did a lovely blurb for me for Unquiet Spirits, which is an essay collection of by Asian women in horror, of their real life experiences with fox spirits and hungry ghosts and what have you. She was so kind to review that. But think perhaps because some of those stories resonated for her and her own personal life. And yeah, she's just such an exciting writer. I can't wait to see what she does next. So
I know she's wonderful as well. I have Unquiet Spirits, by the way. Because I reviewed Unquiet Women for Ginger Nuts of Horror when I used to write for them, and that was how I discovered Angela.
oh yes, she's
Yes,
such a great writer as well. Yeah,
wonderful
absolutely. I
anthology.
love working with her. It's dangerous actually, because whenever I get a little Zoom call with Angela, we think up a new project, and so well, it's kind of how Dispatches came about, because the two we were chatting with Maxwell Ian Gold, and and oh well, we should do something on that, and then off we go, and of course we reviewed it, we critiqued each other's work in order to bring it up to standard, and so just it's dangerous. Some people it's actually dangerous to talk to.
But you get good work out of it. I love that you have a story about how you guys went off and wrote those books. It reminds me of when Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, because she went on a writer's retreat with a bunch of other writers, and they all wrote these masterpieces.
Yes. Well, I don't know about masterpieces. I mean, whether we've written masterpieces, but yes, there's a lot. I mean, because particularly with horror, it was the impetus was basically the beginning of the Ukraine war, and I mean that's still ongoing, and the atrocities that we're seeing, and and it is very frightening. Those are the things that frighten us. They are. That is so close. That is just, it's happening now. It's affecting people, and and so absolutely, those we're tapping into those everyday fears. And I mean, awful that war should be an everyday fear, but unfortunately it's the reality of our world at the moment. So yeah, it is a story. When I think about what you mentioned about Mary Shelley and Pomodoro and Byron and what have you, they were actually on the shores of Lake Geneva, and in that time there was this I can't remember the name of the mountain that erupted. Starts with a T. Anyway, and it erupted, and basically these clouds of ash blew over Europe, and people were starving. So it was a little bit like that pandemic situation that we've just been through, and so you could understand them writing these quite scary. They were isolated, and people were traveling because they were looking for work, looking for food and sustenance. And so you can imagine these waifs, and meanwhile they're fairly well off in this villa, watching this happen outside. And it was very dark. It was, the summer of no summer, the summer, so summer of monsters, if you like. So yeah, I think that there are some similarities in the way stories come about, and I'm not comparing myself to Mary Shelley by any stretch of the imagination, but these things that frighten us tend to end up in stories in some way or another.
I do it accidentally. I write themes into my stories that I don't really realize are there until someone reads it and goes, "Oh, is this about so and so?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah." I guess so.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I wrote a story some years ago, which is called Dead End Town, and it came out in an anthology by IFWG in Australia. And at the time I wrote, it was a small town horror looking at sort of Maori fairies, those sort of malevolent, beasts, also cosmic. And someone said to me, "Oh, this is the Me Too story," and it was right in that sort of Me Too moment in history. And I thought, oh gosh, yes, it is, and so sometimes we don't always know the things that are really impacting us, and yet subconsciously they become those things. They manifest in stories, and of course that may have been why it resonated for people. I mean, it got on the Bram Stoker ballot. It didn't win, but it got on the ballot, and I think it resonated because in the moment that's what people were thinking about. They were really conscious of that. so subconsciously it ends up in a story, and then it resonates because that's the thing we're thinking about. And I think that's possibly true for Dispatches, which is currently on the Bram Stoker list, and also Unquiet Spirits. Those are things we're thinking about. And Black Cranes, and which is this book here, which is kind of where my own story arose.
Oh, that's what I meant. It's not Unquiet Women, Black Cranes.
Black Cranes, yes.
Tales of Unquiet Women. That's why. That's
it. Yes, because we picked up on that word unquiet with this one.
Yeah.
So that this book came out right in the middle of the pandemic, when there was quite a lot of Asian, anti-Asian sentiment around, particularly in the United States. And we at one point had sort of thought, the pandemic came and we'd already thought about this book, and we'd got a publisher, and we'd invited the guest contributors, and we thought, maybe, there's this pandemic on, maybe we should just put this on the back burner. And the contributor said, no, we need to do this now. This is important because there's so much backlash. There's so much prejudice and misunderstanding about, Asian Americans, and people who have nothing to do, and also it was just a flyaway comment, this China virus, and so it was really important to write this book. The stories are not about the pandemic or anything, but the moment was right for this book to again engender empathy, as you very clearly said. That's what writing is about. It's to see another perspective and to understand. So I've been very lucky to be involved with some wonderful writers, but also these very important books that have come out at times that are just, I don't know, just lucky, I guess, auspicious, I suppose we would say in Asian culture, but also just timely. Works that come out in a specific moment that just resonate because that is the thing we're thinking about right at the moment. So
yeah, I think that's a very good place to leave the conversation, but I do have 2 questions I would like to ask you before we finish for the day. The first one is, would you like to recommend a book or an author that you're really enjoying at the moment?
Yeah, well, I think I already said Lauren Elise Daniels is A Serpent's Wake, and The Serpent's Wake, and that's just actually a book I wish I'd written. I mean, I just wish I'd written. I think if anyone is looking to be writing trauma and mental illness, then that's definitely one that you need to read. It's gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. So I think, I think you should look for people like Karen Warren. Her work is fabulous. Dan Raybart's a New Zealand writer. Anything by Genevieve Flynn, Angela Yuriko Smith, so just look at Dave Jeffrey. We've mentioned Priya Sharma, there's just, I could just sit here and rattle off all my friends' names. So, but yeah.
This is the last question, and you might think that this is silly, Lee, but this is very serious. And I have asked everyone that I've interviewed so far, and I'm offering a prize to anyone who actually knows the answer to this. So I don't expect you to know, but do you know what this is?
Is it one of Ricky Gervais's monsters? Because no, okay. He wrote a series of children's books about monsters, and so I wondered if it might be one of those. No, it looks like a Mr. Blobby or something.
No, I've been describing it as a weirdness from my childhood, and I'll tell you what it is when we stop recording, because I'm offering a prize to the first person who could tell me in the comments, or the first author that actually knows what this little peculiarity is.
No, but I think there's a story there. I think there's a story to be written. Yes.
When you should say that, I'm going to tell you about it in a second. So yeah, thank you so much again for doing this, Lee. It's been such a pleasure to speak with you, and I'm such a fan of your work, so it's been just a real delight for me, and I'm sure everybody that's watched. Remember, everyone, Fox Spirit on a Distant Cloud is available now. I will put a link for that in the description, and also a link to Lee's website so you can check out the whole bibliography. Hopefully I can get you back when you have a new release. Maybe you could do a little promo for it. That would be nice.
Yes, I would love that. I have something coming in September with the Sisters of Foreboding. It's called Discontinue If Death Ensues, and it's an anthology of tipping point stories around women's reproductive rights. So it's, yeah, quite exciting. It's coming from Flame Tree Press. So that would be fun to talk about that one. Absolutely.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, be sure to let me know when the ARCs are available. I'll review it.
Oh yes, I will. Yes, I definitely will. And also coming out this year is Grafted, which is a Fox Spirit again, a Fox Spirit Weird Science feature film, which I co-wrote with some New Zealand writers. So yeah, so that's coming out. It's the director is Sasha Rainbow, who's a BAFTA-nominated director, and that's coming out in July. So, and it's body horror, weird science, otherness. Fox Spirit story. So yeah, I'm looking forward to other people. I've seen it in its entirety now. I went to the cast and crew showing about a month ago. So yeah, looking forward to seeing that. So
that sounds amazing. Oh, I can't. Oh, well, there's a lot to look forward to then. So yes, I will make a note of all of that in the description for anyone who wants to check any of this out, so you can find it easily. Thank you once again, and I'll explain that creature to you in a second.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye now.